and welcome to the show. I'm Delia Yeager, and I'm so glad that you're here. So today I wanted to jump on here and talk to you a little bit about resistance and allowance. And resistance comes up so much these days. I live here in Washington, D.C. area, and lots and on. And so resistance, and I have friends and relatives all over the U.S. who are various levels and rights and the Voting Rights Act. So everything when I was 21, I was just burnt out. And then I spent the next 20 years talking politics and studying energy. And it's like I had these parallel trainings going on. Well, I was training in healing and different modalities and energy work. And I still had the energetic connection with politics. And so, but I kept putting on the back burner because I was never going to run for politics. I had friends who spent, hours and hours talking about politics, the local politics or whatever. And I finally got to the point where I said for me that I wasn't going to do that anymore, because if I was never going to run for office, I didn't want to spend another 30 years of intense 4-hour conversations about something that I was never going to professionally partake in. It was like investing in studying for engineering when I was never going to pick up a hammer or whatever engineers pick up. So I had these different wavelengths that were happening, not so much intertwined as parallel, I guess I would say. And now that I live in this area, and now that I live in this time, I got here, I was here for the election. And that was in my groups, the people that I participate with and know well and hang out with, is all about resistance and resisting, Occupy movement. And now we're all on the bandwagon about Amazon not paying taxes or moving into an area. I was in Seattle when Amazon moved into there. And I'm here in Amazon about to move to a Crystal City. And then a lot of people on the sites that I'm on are talking about the Amazon deal in New York and the Amazon deal in Northern Virginia, and thinking they're the same deal because it's the same company. And I happen to know something about the Northern Virginia deal. And it's not anything like the New York. Activism has been a big part of my spiritual development and my values. The point of a spiritual life in the water I swim in is, so what do you do with that, right? My mother was, both my parents were Irish Catholic, and my mother was more activist kind of than my father when they got married, but she got him into it. And he was and those were the choices that she was aware of that she had. They weren't real to her. And so she didn't make them Catholic worker and Catholics. And which is Martin Sheen, if you've ever heard him talk, what do you think? You'll actually end up becoming what you resist. There was a TV commentator when, probably 10 years ago now, Keith Olbermann, who I think he's a sports narrator or whatever you call that. I don't know. But he did a political show for a while, and he was particularly anti-Rush Limbaugh, one of those yelling guys. And he became a yelling guy. And so they were the same, even though they were on the opposite side of the aisle. And he ended up getting fired, I think. And now he's back to the sports talk. But the point is that what you resist, you become. And you end up like having a weird shadow relationship with it. So all those televangelists who lost their shows or were found, having extramarital sex with a teenage girl, or, they were interested in exactly the thing that they're condemning. And so whenever you resist something inside you, it will find a way to express it, recognized, and to be seen, which the technical term for this is it will bite you in the ass. So resistance and allowance are two very different approaches. If you resist, you will get exhausted, because it's exhausting to be in resistance all the time. You'll be cranky because you're white on rice. The thing that you're resisting, you're sleeping with, and you'll have a very darkened view of the world, because you're always bringing the thing that you're resisting into the conversation and into if it's in your peripheral view, you're going to bring it into your forefront. And remind people, we can't be happy about this thing over here because this thing is still there. And so you become the thing that you resist. Does that make sense? So allowance is like the opposite. Resistance, you have to get dense, you have to pull together, you have to kind of coagulate, you have to get, close to the very thing that you're resisting. And you can feel it in your body. So this is oftentimes the tight shoulders, shoulders up towards your ears, or shallow breathing, or gripey stomach. These are different ways that resistance and a chronic resistance can show up. You'll always be listening for the thing that you resist, and you'll always be looking for the thing that you resist. And one of the fundamental truths of life is that you see what you want to see. And if you want to see the stuff that you're resisting, that's all you'll see. So there's a song, I think it's from Ireland, but it might be from here. And it was around the turn of the last century, like a union song, I think. And I don't know if you know about unions, but a lot of people got their heads bashed in asking for rights. And the song that I'm thinking of is called Bread and Roses. The song talks about we march for bread, but we march for roses too. So whatever you're working on, wanting to manifest in the world, there's going to be ways that you're working to change by resisting something. But you want to find a way to bring forth the thing that you want, right? So if you're resisting the way immigrants are treated in the United States right now, then what's behind that is that you want immigrants to be treated the way you were, or the way your grandparents were, or the way your parents were, or better, right? You want something like that or better. instead of the thing that you're resisting, right? So the thing that you're resisting, we'll call that the bread, and we'll call the better the roses, right? So, I mean, bread and roses is really about what we need and what we desire. That's what it's really talking about, but in a beautiful, poetic way. So, I know of a woman who has a great connection with the Amazon. I think she's from Brazil even. And I've spoken to her, I've been kind of in peripheral groups with her. And her approach was to not only send information, disseminate information about Monsanto and the government and different practices around killing off the forest, but I think her tag for her Facebook page, I think, was "I plant trees." So this is a woman who also has an organization that was focused on planting trees. And part of what came up around her focus of planting trees and replanting the forest was to be anti-deforestation. But see how it's a very different focus. When the focus is about healing the forest or planting trees and replacing the losses against the deforestation. So the problem with leaving the battlefield often is that things like feeling like you're the only one who's doing it, but also there's this kind of more shadow side to that too. And it can be that's where you get your sense of worth, or it can be that's where you get your sense of value or community. There can be kind of shadow things that you're getting out of it. And shadow things are not necessarily, they're not bad things unless you shame them. But they're kind of like secondary purposes, behind the scenes motives. Again, not a bad word, which there's nothing to shame, but just to be aware of it, if you're doing what you're doing, if there's some way that you love, if there's something that you love in what you're doing, that's going to sustain you a lot more than that you hate what you're against, or you oppose or resist what you're against, because that will grind you down pretty fast. And this, I think of it as like sewing. If you've ever sewn anything, you have two pieces of fabric and you put them up close together, and then you, with the needle and thread, you bind them. And so you're going back and forth from what are you against and what are you for. And the more you're bringing in the what are you for, that can sustain you and that can fulfill you and that can carry you through the times of having to deal with the latest atrocity. And whatever your area of interest is. And there's a lot going on right now. I mean, pick a topic, pick an area of interest, and there's something collapsing or devastating going on. All right, so the allowance part of this. When you're aware of the destruction, analyzer. So your analyzer has to look at the criteria and see if this is a good thing or a bad thing. And then if it's a bad thing, you have to get on board in one way. And if it's a good thing, you have to get on board another way. And on board, an emotional investment. So that right there, that whole thing is, it uses up a lot of energy. And if you are kind of used to being identified or identifying yourself by what you're against, then it's going to be, well, this is how I participate. This is how I do activism. And then, it'll satisfy some things and it'll drain other things. And you'll find that in time deplete it, because you can't be satisfied by being against. It just, it has an end game to it. It has a built-in end game. End game is probably not the right word, but it's non-sustainable, put it that way. Whereas if you're growing what you love, there's no end to that. It can change, but it won't end. And if you're growing towards what you love, then you're going to be spending some time in that energy every day. Or that's a choice. You have the option. And the more you do spend some time with the thing that you love, the more that's what you're bringing into the world, right? So if you're doing activism only from your emotional investment in what you're against, maybe that's bringing you friends, maybe that's, getting you a social life, maybe that's doing all kinds of things for you, but it will end when the usefulness, you're just gonna not stay productive. Whereas the more you're spending time and energy on what you love, then the more you're actually being that in the world. And the irony is that when you're against stuff, when you're in resistance, then that's the energy that you're bringing into the world. You're bringing in the resistance. And, I know as well as anybody else, it's pretty fun to be the contrarian. And it can be pretty fun to be, the rebel with a cause or the rebel without a cause. And there's a lot of different periods where we have gotten a lot of mileage out of what we're against. But now is a really great time, especially because things are getting more critical. It's really a great time to start to invite yourself to be more pro something. So instead of being against something, what are you for? I don't know if you've ever seen that great musical, South Pacific, but there's a song in there about, there's a scene in there, and the main characters say, well, I know what you're against, but what are you for? And that's where all the juice is what are you for? And what are you for is kind of defenseless. So think about Mr. Rogers. There's a lot of stuff on PBS right now about Mr. Rogers and his life. And Mr. Rogers was very proactive. And he was deliciously subversive because he really cared about the things that he cared about. And so he did things on his show that were pro his values. And he was Episcopalian minister or something, but he was a true Christian. And he, during, was it the 60s or late 60s maybe, there was a lot of racial intolerance going on here in the US. And he met a guy, I think he was a Vietnam vet, and he invited him to be on the show. And he invited this young Black guy to be, I think, a policeman on the show. And the guy in his real life had not had very positive experiences of policemen. So it was transformative for him as a human being to be playing a policeman, and for him to be working with Mr. Rogers, because Mr. Rogers is wonderful. And there was a lot of stuff around public pools and whether or not African Americans could swim in public pools. And so Mr. Rogers had a show where he was cooling his feet in the baby pool, little plastic pool that just covers your feet, and with a hose. And then the policeman comes by on his rounds, and Mr. Rogers asks him if he wants to put his feet in the cold water. This was like revolutionary at the time. And so here's this white man and this black man, and they both have their feet in the little baby pool with the hose. And then I think Mr. Rogers even helped him dry his feet, which was unprecedented at the time. So think about Mr. Rogers. This is an example. Hopefully you've seen it. And the energy of Mr. Rogers is very barriers down, very in allowance, that this is how things are. And he's not resisting race in America. He's just doing it a different way. So he's aware that this is how the climate is right now, and he's going to find a different way to navigate it. So that is my buddy does really well with visual examples, and that's a visual example of being not in resistance, but in finding a whole different way. Because sometimes allowance, people think that maybe allowance, it's like the same misconceptions about forgiveness. Allowance is not about tolerance. It's not about agreeing or colluding with the way things are going. Allowance is just recognizing, oh, that's going on. And then doing something completely different. But if maybe your body has already told you that, when you're in allowance and you're seeing what is, you don't have to judge it. You don't have to emotionally invest in the rightness or the wrongness. You can just see what's happening and say, well, we're going to do this instead. So allowance is, okay, here's a definition of consciousness. Consciousness is allowing everything. Is that right? And judging nothing. Allowing everything and judging nothing. Imagine that. I mean, in this climate, in the world we live in right now, judging nothing makes you, a doormat or the uninformed or an unopinionated, whatever criticism you could say about people who don't have judgments. And yet, again, going back to Mr. Rogers, he just had so much more joy, and he had so many better things to do with his time and his energy than sit in judgment about anything or anybody. And that's what this concept of allowing everything and judging nothing provides for you. It provides that you can access your energy and spend it on the things that actually matter to you. So the I Plant Trees lady is spending her investment, her energy, her emotions, her mental time and energy and everything on what she wants to generate in the world more. And the more you're focused on what it is that you want to generate in the world, the less time and interest you have in what doesn't serve that. And there will always be bait that says that you can't go for what you want to create in the world until you solve this other thing. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but problem solving is like the best bait and switch there is. If the more they can keep people in problem solving, the more they win. Because if you're trained to solve problems, and that's where your worth and your satisfaction comes from, then you have to create more problems to solve. And you've become not a good problem solver, but now you're a good problem solver generator, or a problems generator. so that you can keep solving them. So instead of getting on the hamster wheel of problem solving, with allowance, you can just kind of leave that behind and move into what is it that you want to generate? What is it that you want to have more in the world of? What is it you want to have more of in the world? And when you're spending your time and your focus on what is it that you want to have more of in the world, then you're not going to have as much time and focus on the detractors or the people who are saying that that's silly or stupid. The less that you're judging, the easier it is to see when somebody else is judging, and when people judge, they project at you. And if you're allowing everything and judging nothing, then their projection doesn't have to affect you at all, because you can just go, oh, they're judging me. Okay, well, I'm busy doing what I'm doing. So, imagine going a day or a week or an hour without adjusting what you're doing because of somebody else's projections or judgments. Doesn't that sound like, that would free up so much time. That would free up so much time and energy in your life that you could create all kinds of wonderful stuff. So, doesn't that sound like fun? All right, so thanks for tuning in, and I'll post another conversation soon. And if you have any comments, I'd love to read them below. Thank you so much. And what is it that you love? And let's do more of that. All right, take care. Bye.